What I'm going to share with you is arguments that I've developed over the last couple of months as thinking about Article 2. So here are the six arguments that I've developed. I'll just give them to you in bullet form first, and then go through each of them with a minute or two of some extra explanation right now. So here are the arguments. I don't think that there's any present need, nor is there any popular call for a revision. So I'm not sure why we're going through this process at all. It's sort of the basic, like why do we need to do this is the first argument. The second is that the revision as it stands is inferior in style and content to the current language. It's not as good as what we have now, so it's an inferior replacement. The revision fails to define our faith, which I think is really the job number one for the Article 2 language. I don't see that the revision actually does the job of defining our faith. The revision is incoherent to my thinking in that it twists the meaning of commonly used words. So it's hard to understand what we're actually talking about. It seems opaque, oblique. Argument 5, the revision fundamentally changes our faith. And this is the most important one for me. Changes our faith, the description of our faith, from a faith of guiding principles to a faith of required action. A complete re-understanding of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist in a negative direction. And the sixth argument is that the revision expands the mission of the Unitarian Universalist Association into work that I believe is inappropriate for a voluntary association of independent congregations. Before I get to the six arguments themselves, I just want to start with a brief statement about why this is important to me, what's at stake. I'm sure that you all agree, which is why you're here this morning, but just to sort of, again, some language to communicate with folks who may be sort of shrugging their shoulders about why is this important. Well, it is important to us because the Article 2 is presented to UUA member congregations and individual members as a covenant that we enter into when we become members of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. And to take that covenant language seriously means that we need to be able to wholeheartedly enter into that covenant. We really need to be able to give our personal assent to that language. Most of us joined Unitarian Universalism under the covenant, the current covenant of the seven principles. Now we're being asked to change the covenant, change our relationship to the core of our faith, and let this new language define who we are as Unitarian Universalists. I don't see this new revision as simply an updating of the language of the current Article 2. It really is a wholesale reconception of who we are. And we have to ask ourselves as Unitarian Universalists, are we willing to enter a covenant under this new language? And it's important, and because this really is a wholesale revision of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist, not just an updating of the language. And the change is this, that to be a UU or to be a member of a congregation of the UUA is no longer going to be defined by being a person of principles, but by doing a list of specific actions, given the way that the new Article 2 is written. The Article 2 should be a short, and then, of course, the next question is, well, what does it matter? You know, is anybody be looking over our shoulders? Like, how are we held accountable to this new language? Well, right now, there is not much way for the UUA to hold individual congregations to the new covenant, but that could easily be changed. And I know some of you are aware of conversations that are happening right now at the UUA board that could make it very easy for them to start to ask questions during the certification process of whether the congregation actually is doing the actions that are now required in the new Article 2. And just as a personal UU, you can continue to recite the seven principles and have them posted on your home altar if you want. But the seven principles as our Article 2 will no longer be the official statement of faith for the UUA, which means they're no longer going to be appearing in any UUA publications or religious education curriculum. Ministers will no longer design sermon series around the seven principles. They won't be referenced as common language in our congregations anymore. So although you can continue to hold on to them as sacred if you like, they will no longer be part of the congregation that you attend, which means they won't be referenced or referred to or explored or confirmed in your regular interaction with your congregation. So it will affect your personal faith, whether the articles are retained or the new ones are adopted. So that's what's at stake. Here are my 6 arguments. The first one is that there isn't any present need or any popular call for revision. We're going through this process because when the 7 principles were adopted back in the 80s, there was also part of the language that required they be regularly reviewed. And so we are doing the regular review. However, the requirement that the language be reviewed is not a requirement that the language be changed. And I'm not hearing any call for change. There is no evidence, as far as I can see, that the 7 principles are out of date, that they're no longer serving what they were intended to serve. They're still very active and beloved in our congregations. They're still posted on the walls. There's still sermon series being written about the 7 principles. There doesn't seem to be any ground up call that these are no longer serving the function that they were intended to do. And so although it's certainly appropriate to take a look at them, I don't see any popular call for them to be changed. I like the 7 principles as a poetic statement. To me, they are beautiful. They're memorable. They're well crafted. You've probably noticed that they come in a logical order that moves from individuals to the universal. The language is concise. Each of the statements employs a parallel construction. Each short phrase has one idea to it, and each phrase is distinct from the other ones. The language is lofty and elevated. It feels spiritual to me. Comparing that to the language of the revision, which is much longer, the language is rambling and awkward. It reads to me like a statement of a corporation's core values at the beginning of a financial statement, not like a statement of a religious organization. Many people have talked about the difficulty of memorizing the 7 principles, which I find kind of bizarre. They are easily memorized with just a little bit of attention to it. And they're short enough that you can read all 7 of them at the beginning of a worship service or at the beginning of a congregational meeting. And there are individual principles can be referenced easily as a guiding principle for a particular sermon or an action the congregation wants to take. The revision, on the other hand, has this fussed over quality as though it was written by a committee, which it was. The 7 principles were too, of course, but they don't have that quality. It feels to me when you read the revision like they were trying to accommodate dozens and dozens of voices, each with a particular agenda, and cramming into it all kinds of language and buzzwords and sort of extraneous principles, extraneous words just to satisfy certain constituents. And so it makes it a very difficult statement to actually comprehend, and certainly difficult to memorize if you try to memorize the actual statement rather than just the 7 principles, the values. My third argument is that the revision fails to define our faith. It attempts to define our faith by values, which I think is a possible thing to do. I've always talked about our faith as being a values-based faith, but it would be difficult to define our faith by a list of values.
The microphone.
So I'm sorry, I'm hearing some extraneous noise. It's just distracting me a little bit. So
yeah, but I still don't hear anything. Oh, and now I'm unmuted.
Hi, I'm going to continue talking. So the attempt of the revision is to define our faith by a list of values, which I think is possible because I do think that we are at core defined by our values, but a short list of values is insufficient to define our faith. The question becomes quite immediately, why did we pick these particular 7 values? And why did we end at 7? It seems there's some sort of magic about the number 7. It's 7 principles, and there's 7 turns up all the time in religious language. But are these 7 really does this really do the task of defining our faith? Why not 8 values or 14 values or 20 values? If you read through the values that are currently named in our 7 principles, there are about 14 of them listed there, and some didn't make the cut. Some that are very important to me, like the value of compassion, the value of acceptance, the value of peace. And then the values that did make the list of the revision, I'm not sure really are the core of who we are as Unitarian Universalists. For instance, the value of generosity, which is great, and I think of us as a generous people, but is generosity really the most UU thing about us? The 7 values don't come in a logical order the way the 7 principles do, and there's no sense that they are a complete set the way the 7 principles go from the individual to the universal. So it leaves room open for saying, well, why not this extra one or this other one? And why is it these particular 7? They seem sort of random to me, and they also don't define exactly who we are as a core of our faith. For instance, the value of democracy makes us different from other kinds of authoritarian religions, but democracy didn't make the cut. Our value of reason separates us from more mystical faiths, but reason didn't make the cut. The value of freedom really defines who we are as a liberal religion, but again, freedom didn't make the cut. The 7 principles, on the other hand, really do successfully define who we are to visitors and strangers of our congregations. The 7 principles say something true and meaningful about us. They show how we differ from other religious groups and the way they define themselves. The revision language does not communicate that kind of a clear picture. My 4th argument is that the revision is incoherent in that it twists the meaning of commonly used words. So I think this stems from the difficulty of trying to define our faith by 7 individual words. And so what the revision writers did then was then attach definitions to each of these 7 words that expands them, but it also moves them away from what those 7 words actually mean. For instance, the word generosity, people, I think, know what generosity means, but the revision defines generosity as we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. Well, that's not what generosity means to me. Gratitude and hope are great, but that's not actually what generosity means. Or the word transformation, well, that can mean a lot of different things. According to the revision, transformation is defined as we adapt to the changing world. Well, yes, we do sometimes, but other times we don't. Sometimes we don't adapt. We actually work to assert ourselves against the changing world. For instance, we take action against climate change, not adapting to it. The value of justice is defined in such a way that rather than being this broad category of justice, of fairness and equality, it's defined very narrowly as only having to do with diverse, multicultural, beloved communities. So the revision as itself is confusing. The extra words are meant to add clarity, but instead they make it more incoherent. Article 5 is really the important one to me, that the revision changes the conception of our faith from a faith defined by guiding principles and allowing people to adapt those principles to whatever circumstances they wish, into a faith that's defined by action statements. So there are no action statements in the current 7 principles beyond the introduction that says we affirm and promote the statement itself. The new revision is filled with action statements, which we will now be accountable to as we enter into this covenant. Words like we honor, we celebrate, we work, we adapt, we cultivate, we declare. And then those are further added to with covenant statements that say we protect, we create, nurture, work, learn, embrace, dismantle, support, transform, share, use, build, and sustain. I think it is completely wrong as a statement of faith to define ourselves by actions that we take. Action should flow from our principles, not be our principles. We should hold in common how we do things, not be told what we are going going to do. What an individual UU chooses to do should be up to them. That's part of their freedom. It comes from their own gifts, their own passions, their own interests and resources. We should not have a statement of faith that tells people what they should be doing. The revision requires that we covenant together to do every one of those actions named in order to call ourselves Unitarian Universalists, which is a fundamentally wrong way to define our faith. And finally, Article 6 has to do with how the UUA describes its own mission as part of so this is not the section that has to do with the value statements, but with the purpose statement. And they add two new purposes that I think, again, take the Unitarian Universalist Association away from its core mission, which should be supporting individual congregations. One is that the mission of the UUA will now include the statement that they are there to heal historic injustices, which is fine, an admirable thing to do, but that is not the purpose of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Individual congregations may want to add a mission statement where they work to heal historic injustices, but the purpose of the Unitarian Universalist Association is to support our congregations, not to embark on social justice missions or advocate for changing government legislations to do things like healing historic injustices. We are not a cause-based organization like a nonprofit organization or a corporation. We are an organization defined, the UUA is an organization defined by and supported by congregations in order to provide support to those congregations. We need the UUA to stay in its lane. And the other new part of the mission statement comes at the end, where now the UUA is going to be defined as, where's the language? The Unitarian Universalist Association will actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. Again, that's not the purpose of the UUA, and nor is it the purpose of the UUA to require that the member congregations have a mission of transforming the world. Again, some can choose to do that if that's right, but that's not why our congregations are, that is not a requirement of our congregations that they all work on transformation of the world. So in conclusion, I'll just read this to you from my statement. The revision replaces a clear and concise state of faith principles with an arbitrary and incomplete set of values. The revision confuses the value words by accompanying each value word with a statement that channels the value into a specific action, sometimes distorting the common meaning of the value or narrowing a broad value to apply only to a particular context. The value words are further abused by a covenant statement that inappropriately requires specific actions of all UUs and UU congregations rather than leaving the expression of our faith to an individual's personal interests and capabilities and our independent congregation's own sense of their mission. The purpose of the UUA is to serve the member congregations, not to heal historic injustices or to direct the congregations or individual UUs to do any particular work. Yet this statement is filled with required work for UUs and UU congregations and drags the UUA itself out of its appropriate lane. And most concerning, the revision's reference to specific actions and accountability open the door to a creeping denominationalism that could eventually erode the independence of our congregations in violation of our historic congregational polity. The revision is too vague and complicated to communicate our identity to visitors, too meandering and long to memorize, and too badly written to inspire our reverence. And yet, the original Article 2 continues to serve us well. So no wholesale revision is warranted, and if adopted, would serve us less well. So for those reasons, I would reject the Article 2 revision as proposed.